All right, so I just wanted to make a quick video on explaining another type of transition animation. So if you saw my other video, I highly recommend checking it out. It goes through the process of creating a transition animation, so a walk cycle going into the idle animation. Transition animations are something that you'll be creating pretty often when you're working in games. It's not the most flashy type of animation, but it is really important to have this whole set of start and stops and going from an idle to a walk or a walk to a run, or maybe an idle to turning 45 degrees and walking. So there's all these transition animations that you need to make, and there's a couple of ways you can go about it. And I just want to go through the process of one of the ways that I usually create these transition types of animations. It's a great way to get something in there really quickly, and then you can further refine it as needed. So if you watch my other video, this is going to be a very similar process utilizing Maya's animation layers. So in this scene, we've got our character's basic just idle stance. So we can imagine this is sort of its resting idle stance if you were to see this in game. Sort of if you stop playing, your character will stand like this. And in another scene, I have the walk cycle. So I've got the character walking, and this is what we're going to transition to. We're going to transition from the standing into the walking. And this is actually the walk cycle that we create in the walk cycle animation masterclass. It's a free tutorial, so I highly recommend checking that out on the YouTube channel as well. We go through the process of creating this walk animation you see here. So what we need to do is we just need to take all this animation that's in the scene. So I've got Animbot here. I have a quick select set to select all of my control curves, and we just want to select everything in the scene, or all of the animation actually. And one thing to note is if I select my main control, let me open up the graph editor, we have the movement that we need. So we have the curve on this forward motion set correctly, so you can see we're not getting any foot sliding. So this is the speed that we need for the walk. So we want to make sure that we take the main control animation as well. And you can go ahead and select the copy animation button inside of Animbot to copy this animation. And the great thing about Animbot is that you can copy and move poses and move animations between between Maya scenes. I've been using Blender too much. But that way we can have two Maya scenes open, and then we can just copy the animation, then open up this idle scene and then paste our walk cycle in. So before we actually paste this animation in, let's go to our animation layers. I'm gonna go to layers, and I'm gonna choose create override layer from selected. All right, so we've got this brand new layer in here, and then this is where I wanna paste the walk cycle in. So I'm gonna go ahead and do paste insert and let that load up, and then I can expand my timeline. You can see this goes to frame 128. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that we're not actually going to use all of these frames to create this idle to walk animation. We'll probably want to end it right around frame 48. And honestly, that might be too much time for a idle animation into a walk. It really just depends on the style of game you're creating, how responsive you want the controls to feel. So this might feel a little bit sluggish, but we'll go ahead and just basically set this to start from frame 0, and we want to enter the full walk cycle by frame 48. So we want to make sure we enter the correct speed at frame 48. And this extra animation that I have tagged on at the end, this is just going to allow me to make sure that I'm blending properly from a standstill into the walk animation. And then this extra cycle is just going to allow me to make sure that the speed is correct. So it's not ending my animation and then suddenly there's a speed up because I got the wrong speed for my enter, or maybe it's really fast on my enter and then it actually slows down getting into the walk, because then that would create a lurching motion. So I just have this extra walk tagged on at the end just to make sure I have a nice transition, but really we only want this to go to frame 48. So now that we have this override layer in there, we can name it if we want. I honestly typically don't name my layers, but I'll just call this walk. And I want to go to this wait button. I'm going to hit the select or insert a key right there. And then I'm going to go to frame 48. I'm going to hit that key button. And then, so I've added a keyframe at frame 0 and I added a keyframe at frame 48 for this wait value. I'm going to go to frame 0 and I'm going to zero this out. So now it's using all of the information on the layer below, this base layer, which contains just my idle pose. So now what we're going to get is that you can see that through this weight blending, it's blending into the walk animation through 48 frames. So it's taking 48 frames to get from my stop into the walk. Now, another thing that I want to make sure that I do on this main control is I want to make sure that I go over here to animation editors, graph editor. I want to make sure I just continue this curve with an offset, basically an infinite amount, this forward motion. So I'm going to go ahead and go to curves, post-infinity cycle with offset. We can do pre-infinity cycle with offset as well. So it's just going to continue that forward motion. The next thing that we want to do is I'm going to open up my graph editor again, and I'll go ahead and just drop this in the actual UI here and snap the graph editor there. And I want to take a look at this weight value. So typically when we're creating this blending of the override layer and we're blending from the idle pose into the walk cycle, we have just this basic S type of curve, this slow in and then slow out, and then this straight curve in the middle, which basically means we're slowly starting the transition. The curve straightens out, which means the transition gets quicker, and then it slows into the last keyframe, which means that gets slower. So it's basically we're getting as far as our spacing goes, we're getting spacing really close together at the start. So it's slowly starting this animation. With that straight curve, it speeds up the animation. The spacing gets further apart, and then it slows down again at the end. So we're getting this sort of like jerky motion into the walk. And then you can see the extra animation I have tagged at the end will give me a good idea to feel how this transition actually feels going into the speed of the walk cycle that we have. So you can see it doesn't really feel right. It feels like this walk cycle really speeds up and then actually like lurches and slows down right as it gets into the actual proper walk cycle past frame 48. So one thing that we can do to fix this is kind of just mess around with this curve type and see if we can get a better transition. So usually I'll try something like this, and I'll bring this curve up like that and create this sort of long, sort of arcing curve. And we can play this, and something like that already is starting to feel a bit better. You can see as it goes into the rest of the walk cycle, which is what we want. So frame 48 is where this animation, we want this animation to end. We don't want this to be a really long idle to walk cycle blend transition animation, which honestly 48 frames might be too long. We probably could maybe try to shrink this down into like one step going into the walk cycle, but we'll go ahead and just keep it like this for now. But already that's feeling better. We don't have as much as that strange like lurching motion going into the rest of the walk cycle. It feels like it's stopping. The animation is ending at frame 48 at a proper speed to where it feels like it kind of just naturally transitions into the rest of the walk cycle. So already that's looking quite a bit better. Now, the next thing that I want to do, which might seem a little bit strange, but it does give some free animation, I guess you could say, is if we take the translate Z value, the forward motion on the main control, and we actually bring this down a little bit. So we're actually moving this translate Z value back just a little bit. And it's hard to see, and we actually can't see what's going on because we're on frame 0 and the weight value is set to 0. So we're taking all the idle pose. So I'm like moving this a crazy amount, and then I just realized I can't see what I'm actually what I'm actually doing until I jump to the next frame. So let me actually jump to frame 1 where it's starting to blend into the actual walk cycle. So I'm going to bring this way up here, and I'm going to go into a negative value, not by a whole lot, something like this, and we can see how this feels. So because I've grabbed the entire translate Z curve and I've actually moved it to a negative value at frame 0, once it actually starts to blend into the walk cycle, it's going to give us this slight motion backwards. And this is honestly probably too much movement backwards. So I'm going to grab this curve and bring it down again just a little bit. Still definitely feels too much. I might actually bring it down a little bit more. So what that's giving me now is that as it starts to blend, it's giving me this slight kind of like movement anticipation backwards. before it actually starts moving forward. So it might be a little bit too much, and I might bring this back up just a little bit. So we get this like little bit of movement backwards on the start of the animation, almost like this little bit of kind of anticipation moment for it. All right, so the next thing that we need to do is make sure our foot plants are working properly, and we can do this really easily with Animbot. And if you don't have Animbot, you can check out my other video on how to get ATools, which is basically an older version of Animbot that has a lot of the functionality of Animbot, but it's completely free. So if you don't have Animbot, I would check out that video and get that downloaded, because it does have something similar to the tool I'm about to use. And we need to fix basically just the sliding that's happening. So what we can do is grab the Xform copy, this world space copy basically. And let me actually go to, I think, frame 32. And I'm going to extend the leg back, and I want to see basically how much extension I can get with this back leg and that it still looks correct, because we need to take the value that the foot is at right here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go to frame 31, paste it, 28, paste it, 24, paste it, 20, paste it. And this is where it'll start to get a little bit tricky, because we've got a pretty big jump between here and then where it actually plants. So I'm going to move the foot out a bit, and we can have like a little bit of sliding into that pose. Should be fine. But I really want to fix this transition here, and we can turn on the arc tracker here to make sure we're getting kind of the animation that we want on the foot. So I'll probably bring this foot up here a little bit higher, keep it up through this portion, maybe bring it out, probably keep it up right here. And then I might actually probably need to bring it up a little bit earlier too, to make sure I'm getting a nice, decent path through there. So something like that should work. So we basically had to just adjust this footstep just a little bit to make sure it works properly going into the actual walk cycle through here. So that's looking okay. And we'll need to fix this here too, because you can see it's shifting back and forth, even though all these keyframes are matched up. In between is not. So one thing we can do to fix this, like a quick way, is I'll just go and apply this pose through the rest of the frames there to keep it locked. So once it plants, it'll lock there. And then I'll probably need to tweak this pose a little bit to keep it further back. Something like that. So what I want to do now is take a look at this foot at the beginning. I want to make sure it's locked. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it. So using that Xform copy here to copy and then paste through all of this to make sure that this foot is staying planted. Probably through all of this as well. And looks like there's a little bit of foot roll happening. So I want to zero that out through all of this. It's got a little bit of sliding right in here. So I probably want to copy this. It looks like it's happening just in between here. So I'm going to make sure I paste that value between those keyframes to lock it. And then it quickly pops forward. So I'm going to take the keyframe on 24 and probably favor that back just a little bit. It might swing forward just a little bit too fast too. So something like that. And we're just trying to tweak the foot steps at the very beginning of the animation to make sure they're working decent. And I think I want to tweak this one right here. So we're going to probably need to do something similar to that. So basically we're ending this transition at frame 48. So this is where it's actually blended into the walk cycle animation. And then we've got all this rest of the animation there just to kind of see how it blends. So I'm going to take this value here because I know the foot needs to be right here. as far as how much forward it is in the translate Z space. So I'm going to copy this with Anibot. I'm going to jump here and paste that value at frame 44, paste that value at frame 40, paste that value at frame 36. And then this is where we're going to have something similar where we might need to tweak some of these poses in here to get what we want. And there might be a little bit of sliding going into it, but like this can probably be lifted up. And let's see, I might be able to move this forward just a little bit. I'll probably actually add a keyframe right here just to clean up this path and that arc, something like that. And then we're gonna need to, so these keyframes, there's no movement, but the in-betweens, we're getting the shifting around because the actual main control is moving. So I'm just gonna frame by frame that and make sure it's locked right there. Same for these in-betweens. And there's like a little bit of shifting, but I think that's probably fine. That's not too bad. And again, this is just a way to get a really quick kind of start for this type of transition animation. There's obviously a lot of time we can spend really tweaking this transition. Like through here, I would probably start like adjusting the hips just a little bit for this step to make sure we're not getting some weird hyperextension. I would probably go in here and adjust this foot roll and tweak that a bit. Same for this one right here, this foot roll coming in. This probably should be up a little bit more, something like that. But this is just a good way to get the sort of basic start for this transition animation. These override layers allow you to get some of that movement for free. So we have that little bit of anticipation backwards kind of for free. The foot plants, we kind of got most of that movement for free just by blending. And then we had to kind of adjust the actual foot plants and make sure they were staying kind of stationary through there. There's one thing I want to tweak here. This swings forward too fast. Just try to clean up that arc a little bit. All right, so now that we've got the feet kind of moving how they need to, we now need to make a few just basic adjustments to the actual up and down motion of this. So what I can actually do is just go to this walk layer, and I might start kind of tweaking some of the up and down motion. So here, I feel like it's going down too early, so I'm gonna maybe continue that movement up a little bit, and then it'll drop down. Maybe reduce the amount it drops down just on that beginning keyframe. Might go to the translate Z, the forward motion on this, and I might adjust this through some of this right in here and just tweak this value just on this layer and maybe get like a little bit of forward movement, because right now the hips might be moving back a little bit too far. So we might have taken that main control back a little bit too far to get that little bit of anticipation for free, but we can adjust that and bring the actual hip control forward just a tiny bit, just because I want to make sure it doesn't feel like off balance, because it was like a little bit too far back. So something like that. And then I'll probably delete this keyframe just to ease in to this movement there, something like that. And we're getting a little bit of a hitch right in here. So what I'll probably do is grab this keyframe and just ease it for a little bit longer. It's looking okay. There's still definitely some things we would need to tweak. This is definitely not kind of like a polished transition, but it is, you know, a quick way to get some basic movement in there. So what I want to do now is grab the root control, add a new layer, and then I'm going to tweak real quickly, kind of just some side to side movement. So here I need to get the hips over that supporting leg more. So it kind of starts this transition like that. And then around frame 23, I'll probably zero it out. And that feels like that's actually too far over. So I'll probably lessen that shift to the side a bit, and then maybe through here, I'll zero it out to where it is by default. Because again, I want to make sure that at frame 48, I'm just keeping that exact same walk cycle pose. I can't really tweak this pose at all, because this is the pose that actually transitions into the walk. I'm going to make sure this is set to auto tangent. There we go. So there's just a little bit of like tweaking to the side that we need to do. That might be too much and too fast, so I might add a few more frames to that transition. And I'm gonna just go ahead and throw another layer on this root and do another little bit of tweaking. So maybe at frame 12, I want to kind of lean character forward a little bit more, maybe add like a little bit more rotation to the side through the start of this animation. So he kind of like leans just a little bit more forward and kind of brings, because his left arm is the one swinging forward, kind of brings that shoulder down and kind of leans toward that direction just a little bit at the start. So kind of just basically getting his body involved in the movement. And then I'll go to frame 29, hit this button right here to reset this value back to its default. So we've got like a little bit of just leaning forward, and then it kind of straightens back out, and kind of just pointing his left shoulder first into the walk to kind of get the momentum to start. And again, looking at it from this view, I'm going to take a look at the path and probably clean this up a bit. Something like that. And actually have a kind of a mock game camera, imagining if this were, oops, I don't know what happened to it. Let me jump to perspective. What is going on with this thing? Oh, there's keyframes on it. There shouldn't be keyframes. There we go. I just have it constrained to the main control. So imagining as if this were kind of like the third person camera. And typically if you are working on like a third person game, you could have the actual like camera in Maya, the third person camera, so that you can actually look at your animation to see what it's going to look like from the perspective of the player. So imagining the player, you know, slightly pushing forward on their controller to initiate the transition from a stop into a walk, and then this sort of blend that we have here. So it actually stops at frame 48 is where it actually enters that full walk cycle pose. And again, it might be something where stuff like this might need to be an even faster transition. So maybe it just really needs to get into that cycle within like a second or less. So in that case, we'd probably have the stop here, and then it would need to basically enter its walk cycle pose within this first step almost. So it's basically just taking from its idle pose from this step, from this stance, and then it would just be like in the walk cycle pose right here if you wanted to create like a really quick transition. This is something that's like a little bit more natural, but this is how I approach this kind of stuff. Again, there's still a lot to tweak. There's still like a little bit of like lurching, I feel. So I definitely need to go in here and like fine tune that blend just to make sure it feels like as much of a natural transition as it possibly can. Because the great thing about this, when you are creating those transition animations, is that you as an animator have like complete control on how this transition feels and making it feel natural or making it fit the gameplay needs. Versus just using a straight, you know, animation blend that a game engine might give you. You actually have the ability to go in here and fine tune it. So it's always great to spend that time to make sure you're getting it exactly how you want. But this is usually how I approach it. Just a override layer and just tweaking the weight value, adding some layers in there, tweaking the foot position. And we've got this on that main control. So if I just mute this, wouldn't have that forward motion, and we can kind of see, you know, the basic blend that we're getting kind of as it's doing its sort of like treadmill type of walk into the transition. So yeah, hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe and comment if you have any questions or suggestions for any other videos in the future. So thanks for watching.